Hello, children. What's crack-a-lackin'? Today we're talking about how we determine the meaning of words using context clues in a text. So what is this and why are we doing it? So basically what it is using the rest of a text, so that's the words, the descriptions, the dialogue, the scenarios, the concepts and ideas, to help you determine the meaning of words that are new, complicated, or confusing. The reason that we do this is to gain a fuller understanding of what we're reading. Sometimes a single word can have a lot of important information in it and can help us understand all the other ideas in the piece. We also do this because it helps us practice our critical thinking skills, taking pieces of a puzzle and putting them together, coming up with a conclusion or an inference. Finally, we do it because it helps to ensure active rather than passive reading. And when we do that, it helps us retain more information. Basically, if you're actively engaged and you're reading along, you're looking at the text, exploring the text, moving things around, way more of what you're reading is going to stick in your brain. So before we get started, we should probably talk about some basics. First, the object of this strategy is not to have the perfect meaning of the word, but to get as close as possible. It's important that we don't get hung up on having the beautiful 1000% correct dictionary definition. We're trying to get as close as we can so that we can move on and continue processing the information in the text. 2, the techniques that we're going to talk about are not some magical formula. They're just ways that you can collect clues which you then have to think about, analyze, and put together. This work is messy, and we have to be comfortable with how messy it is. Finally, and this is just more of a general tip, whenever reading anything challenging, you need to slow down. Okay? If you're cruising along at the pace that you would normally read something that is very accessible to you, you're going to be missing tons of information and ideas, and you're going to lose out on understanding what's going on. All right. So the first thing that we want to do if we're trying to figure out what a word means in context is determine what part of speech the word is. Is it a verb? Is it a noun? Is it an adjective? Or is it an adverb? We do this so that when we eventually try to come up with a word or a synonym to replace that word with, it's the same part of speech, so all the ideas flow together correctly. In our example here, we have the word authentic. Let's go ahead and read that sentence. I have no accurate knowledge of my age, never having seen any authentic record containing it. So if I'm looking at this and thinking about what part of speech it is, I have to take a look at the words around it. So it comes before the word record. I know that a record is a noun. So authentic, since it's describing it, has got to be an adjective. Now, when I eventually get to the point where I'm replacing authentic with a synonym, I can make sure it's the same part of speech so all the ideas flow together logically, clearly, accurately. 2, we want to determine the connotation, that's the charge, and the tone of the word. So remember that connotation is the energy that a word has. Is it negative, positive, neutral? Is it strong? Is it weak in the context that it's written? The tone is the author's attitude towards whatever he or she is writing about. Basically, it's the way they feel about the topic. And we're going to describe tone with essentially emotion words. Angry, disgusted, melancholy, overjoyed, stuff like that. Let's look at our example. A want of information concerning my own was a source of unhappiness to me even during childhood. The white children could tell their ages. I could not tell why I ought to be deprived of the same privilege. I was not allowed to make any inquiries of my master concerning it. So first we're thinking about the charge of our highlighted word deprived. If we're looking around at other words in this passage, we have things like unhappiness, not allowed, okay? These words show us that this has a negative charge. So whatever word we're going to eventually replace it with needs to also have that negative energy. In terms of the tone, we do the same thing. We look around at the situation, okay? So it's a kid who is being treated differently, unfairly. We look at the words that are in there. Again, words like unhappiness, not allowed, things like that. And that's going to help us arrive at the writer's attitude, which here sounds very sad, perhaps frustrated, maybe even a little bit angry. Now when we select our replacement word, we can make sure it has that same tone and that same connotation. 3, we want to at least try to take a look at the parts of the word, the prefixes, the suffixes, the roots. Now, we might not know what every single root, what every single prefix, what every single suffix means, but if we think about this, it can bring us oftentimes a little bit closer to understanding the word itself. We want to look at the different pieces in the word, and then we want to think about other words that we know that look similar or are made of the same pieces. We are using the same example passage from our last slide and focusing on that word deprived again. So if I look at deprived, I know that the prefix de is talking about removing something or having something taken away or diminished. So now I have a clearer picture that that word deprive probably has something to do with removing, taking away, or lessening. Now's where we get our hands really dirty. We have to review the context surrounding the word. So the word context just means background information. So when we're talking about context, we're talking about any background information in the rest of the text that can be useful to us. We want to look at the whole thing. So first, reread the sentence before the unfamiliar word, then read the sentence containing the unfamiliar word, and then read the sentence after the unfamiliar word. When you're doing this, seek out any contextual information that might provide you a clue. That means other words. That means what characters or people are saying. That means the concepts that are being focused on. That means the actions or scenarios that are taking place. And if you need to, don't be afraid to examine the entire paragraph or even the entire page or chapter. You're going to use all your information that you've gathered to determine a definition or synonym, what is happening, children? Synonym that you can replace the word with. Now, we're talking about replacing the word a lot, so before we get into the whole process, let's talk about that. Please only begin substituting words once you have already done some clue collecting and some thinking. If you're trying to replace words and make substitutions before you've done any real deal detective work, then you are going to oftentimes put in a word that doesn't make sense or leads you to, in many cases, the opposite of where you need to go. You're going to have major league misunderstandings. So collect your clues, do some thinking, and then go into the substitution. All right. So this is the passage that we're going to look at, and we're going to go through our 5 steps. Now remember, messy process, so some of them may fit really well, some of it might be easier to do, some of it might be more challenging, but we're going to get our hands dirty now. First, looking at the part of speech. 2, the charge and tone. Then we're going to look at the pieces of the word, the prefixes, the suffixes, the roots. We're going to hunt for clues, and then eventually we're going to substitute, replace, or define that word. So we're focusing on that word that's highlighted, seldom. Let's read our passage. By far the larger part of the slaves know as little of their ages as horses know of theirs. And it is the wish of most masters within my knowledge to keep their slaves thus ignorant. I do not remember to have ever met a slave who could tell of his birthday. They seldom come nearer to it than planting time, harvest time, cherry time, springtime, or fall time. A want of information concerning my own was a source of unhappiness to me even during childhood. Okay, so first and foremost, we are starting with the part of speech. So they seldom come nearer to it than planting time. They seldom come nearer to it. Okay, so that is coming before the words come nearer, moving towards. So they seldom move towards. That means it's describing an action. So that's got to be an adverb. We know that whatever we end up replacing it with has got to be an adverb. 2 is going to be the charge and tone. Now in this case, we're looking over the overall piece, and again we see a lot of words that have extremely negative connotations. Words like ignorant, slaves, unhappiness, a want of information. We know that whatever this word is, it's going to have that negative charge. And along with that, the tone seems to be, as it was before, very, very negative. So we might call it something like unhappy, or in a more extreme sense, morose, mournful, disgusted, something along those lines. Next, we get to the pieces of the word: prefix, suffix, and root. Now, here, I just happen to be like a real deal expert at this kind of thing. So I happen to know that seld is a prefix that means rare. I would say for most people, though, this word is going to be really difficult to break apart. So we might have to think for a moment and then just move on. Like I said, this is a messy process. Now we are looking for clues. Okay, looking over our whole thing, reading the sentence before, the sentence containing, and the sentence after. And I'm seeing, okay, wanting information. All right, I do not remember who could tell of his birthday. They seldom come nearer to it than to specific times. I'm going to go ahead and expand to the first sentence as well. The larger part of slaves know as little of their ages as horses know of theirs. It is the wish of most masters within my knowledge to keep their slaves thus ignorant. So I know that ignorant means like not knowing. So they seldom come nearer to it. Okay, putting around all of these different things I've been rooting through here, my parts of speech, my charges, my tones, my prefixes. I'm going to have to say that that's going to be something like rarely. Okay, that's going to be my replacement. Now, there are some helpful hints that you can look for in these different situations. Oftentimes, there might be a definition or explanation of the word in the text. There might be synonyms next to or around the word. Sometimes there are examples of what the word is or does right there in the sentence. Sometimes there's contrasting information, where they give you one example and then they give you an example that's meant to show the opposite. Finally, we can look for comparisons, analogies, and figurative language related to the word in the text. Now, all in all, these aren't necessarily going to be there, but they're good to be aware of because they can give you a much faster grip on the word. All right, children, so that's going to be that for this. I am asking you again, remember, you're going to have to do some thinking. You're going to have to wrap your noodle around this stuff. Don't be passive, be active. Bye.